The details: Schiller was Trump's bodyguard in New York and became White House Director of Oval Office Operations, but left in September. Per CNN, Schiller yesterday denied the salacious claims about Trump's 2013 trip to Moscow that appeared in the opposition research Russia dossier about Trump. Schiller told lawmakers repeatedly that he could not recall or was not aware a number of potential Russia connections with Trump associates. Why he matters. From Politico's Annie Carney. When friends and advisors outside the West Wing wanted to share a news article, gossip, or advice with Trump, they would be advised to send it to Keith. He'll get it to me. Schiller knows how to manage the president's moods, his diet, what triggers him and what soothes him. When a dozen Senate Democrats met with two White House officials at the Library of Congress yesterday to discuss tax reform, President Trump called in from South Korea. Sen. Joe Manchin DWVA had convinced his party colleagues to hear the pitch from White House economic advisor Gary Cohn and congressional liaison Mark Short, who asked the Dems for advice. When Trump rang in, Cohn put him on speaker. The president said the tax bill was awful for rich people, and repeated a line he has used about his accountant telling him it's a bad bill for him. The meeting went well enough that the group plans to meet again next week. What the bill would do: stop enabling sex traffickers access that would reduce legal protections for platforms that host user-generated content, allowing trafficking victims to sue if platforms had knowingly facilitated the crime. Online platform companies initially argued the bill undermined their business model and could open the door to more legal liability for content on their sites. But last week, the Internet Association, which represents Google, Facebook and other web companies, endorsed the bill after reaching a deal to modify some language. The bill, and the compromise amendment, moves to its first vote this morning. Behind the scenes, here's how the compromise came together. According to interviews with multiple sources with knowledge of the negotiations, Google put up a significant fight over the bill. The company proposed several changes, including having the Justice Department sign off on state attorneys general pursuing the sites, which the bill's backers rejected as attempts to significantly weaken the bill, said two Senate sources. Facebook, meanwhile, didn't push back as hard on the compromise or engage in significant active lobbying as the negotiations reached the homestretch, according to multiple people. Both companies declined to comment. Facebook, who Sheryl Sandberg said in a Facebook post yesterday that she is grateful that lawmakers reached a compromise. Senators from both parties ratcheted up the pressure to make a deal. That includes Senate Commerce Committee Chair John Thune, who wanted a compromise before the bill proceeded to a committee vote, multiple sources said. Another source said that Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer wanted to see the companies and lawmakers reach a deal. A group of lawmakers shared some of the tech industry's concerns but pushed the industry to work at a compromise. A cadre of Democrats, led by Sen. Kamala Harris, wanted to see changes to the bill before they signed on. They ultimately did the same day the compromise was announced. Staffers for Sen's Rob Portman and Richard Blumenthal huddled with the Internet Association and Thune staff in the final weeks of negotiations, the two Senate sources said. The deal was only finalized 9 minutes before the deadline to circulate the proposed text to members of the Commerce Committee, according to one of the sources. The Internet Association declined to comment. What they're saying: some tech industry sources tell us the deal isn't considered much of a win for tech, but was necessary given the political circumstances. This is grudging, but a recognition of the politics, said a technology industry source, adding that the tech firms also understood the gravity of the sex trafficking crimes involved. Others argue that the changes are substantive, making it possible for companies to fight trafficking without incurring new liability and ensuring that all claims brought by state officials are tied to federal law. They also say there was a very real chance that the bill could have passed as it was originally written, which would have been a worse outcome for the industry. Engine, which represents smaller internet companies, and Tech Freedom said Monday that support for the bill signals good intentions and the importance of the issue, but doesn't mean the bill is the best way to fight sex trafficking. Nor, unfortunately, will the changes announced on Friday prevent the bill from backfiring. The bigger picture: these negotiations have been going on for months but came to a head late last week, in the midst of 2 days of tense hearings where Google, Twitter and Facebook were questioned about Russian manipulation of their platforms to influence the presidential election. Many in the tech industry felt they needed to resolve the sex trafficking issue in part to focus on other battles coming down the pike, including a separate bill seeking new online political ad disclosures, sources say. I can't think of another issue where tech had to fold like this, said a Senate aide familiar with the negotiations. What's next? If the bill passes today, the next step would be a vote on the Senate floor. That could be blocked, or at least made more difficult, by Sen. Ron Wyden, who wrote the law that protects web platforms from being liable for the content their users post. Be smart. After tech heavyweights defeated a pair of piracy bills in 2012, lawmakers tiptoed around issues that could take off the industry. Tech lobbyists even reminded SESTA bill sponsors of that win during early talks about the bill, two sources said. The industry still has plenty of clout in Washington, but new skepticism and policy fights have emerged over the past 5 years. In a new paper, Wesley Pegden, Ariel Procaccia and Dingley Yu plot out a game of alternating rounds of play, in which each political party takes its best shot at maximizing advantage on a districting map. Player A maps a state into districts. Player B then peruses those districts, and selects one to freeze. No changes can now be made to that district. Then Player B takes over, mixes up the game board as he or she sees fit, and now Player A freezes another district in place, and so on, until all the districts in the state are fixed. In the end, neither player has an inordinate chance to pack districts with an unequal voting balance. In the real world, you still might expect the results to be less than perfect, says Pegden. But this would be much more fair and balanced than having one party do essentially whatever it wants. There is more work to do, he says. Their proposed system cannot simply be installed in Wisconsin, for instance, the venue of the dispute in the Supreme Court case. The point is that it shows that a major obstacle to fair districting's where do you find independent agents can be overcome by using a fair division approach to drawing the districts, Pegden says. Using mathematical reasoning, the researchers found that players did not necessarily take the simple choice of freezing a district in which they have a majority. For example, Player A might concede a large majority in a district to Player B, with the goal of reducing the number of supporters available to B later in the game. After freezing that district, there are much fewer supporters of B left, and that could allow A to win more districts down the road, Procaccia told Axios in an email exchange. An optimal strategy looks into the future and considers all possible outcomes. Go deeper. For gaming wanks, districts can be good for Player A either because Player A wins a district without using too many more than 50% of the votes to do so, or because Player B wins but needs to waste a lot of votes to do so, says Pegden. Bertolini says healthcare should take a lot of cues from Apple, noting people are already willing to make appointments at the Genius Bar. Not only that, but they willingly pay money. They don't sell anything at the Apple Store. People buy stuff at the Apple Store, he said. And aesthetics matter. It has to be a place that's not linoleum floors and Formica counters. It needs to be a place where people want to go, and it doesn't need to be as expensive as the marble on the Apple floors and the glass staircase, but it can be a better experience. Cost is a big factor, he said, noting that drawing blood at a retail location can be as much as 50 to 100 times cheaper than in a clinical setting. In seizing vast executive powers, as in this weekend's sweeping arrest of royals and officials, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman is undoing the last of those checks and balances, princely economic and security fiefdoms that acted as countervailing influences. He has freed himself to engage in ill-fated confrontations abroad that dilute Saudi power, exposing the kingdom to greater military threats and scaring off investors. Complicating matters further, the Crown Prince has opened too many fronts at once: military entanglement in Yemen, a blockade of Qatar, and a campaign against the Muslim Brotherhood. Most recently, he has accused Lebanon of being a hostile power because of the dominance of the pro-Iranian group Hezbollah. Why it matters: by risking instability and even open conflict, these moves undermine Saudi Arabia's power and play to the strengths of its regional rivals. Iran in particular thrives on disarray in the Middle East, and its militant proxies far outmatch the kingdoms. Other highlights from Trump's speech: we call on every nation including China and Russia to fully implement UN Security Council resolutions, downgrade diplomatic relations with the regime, and sever all ties of trade and technology. We did not choose to draw here, the line between peace and war, between decency and depravity, between law and tyranny, between hope and total despair. It is a line that has been drawn many times in many places throughout history. To hold that line is a choice free nations have always had to make. North Korea is right about only one thing: the Korean people do have a glorious destiny, but they could not be more wrong about what that destiny looks like. The destiny of the Korean people is not to suffer in the bondage of oppression, but to thrive in the glory of freedom. The Affordable Care Act's Medicaid expansion was a big winner tonight. Voters in Maine approved a ballot measure to participate in the expansion, and Democrats' significant gains in Virginia improved the odds it will expand the program, too. What's next? Although Maine voters signed off on Medicaid expansion last night, some advocates expect Gov. Paul Lepage to drag his feet until he leaves office next year, pushing the actual implementation of tonight's referendum to his successor. In Virginia, Democrats romp through the House of Delegates, where the policy died under Gov. Terry McAuliffe, will make Medicaid expansion significantly more likely. There are now 13 Republicans departing in 2018 and just one Democrat. In addition, Jason Chaffetz resigned his seat in June, and his replacement is being elected Tuesday. Outlier check 1. According to Brookings, the average term served for retiring members has hovered around 8 over the last 40 years, but dropped to 5 in the 2016 cycle. The average among these 13 Republicans is 9.3. Outlier check 2. The number to watch for to help determine if this trend is notable is 23. That's the average number of retiring representatives over the last 5 election cycles. Over that time, there has been more attrition from Republicans than from Democrats. However, the 12-to-1 ratio of retiring Republicans to Democrats is a considerable disparity. A look at the 13 departing Republicans. Ted Poe of Texas State announced November 7 terms 72,016 margin of victory 25 points 2016 presidential Trump by 9 points Frank Lobiano of New Jersey date announced November 7 terms 122,016 margin of victory 22 points 2016 presidential Trump by 5 points Lamar Smith of Texas State announced November 2 terms 15 2016 margin of victory 31 points 2016 presidential Trump by 10 points Jeb Hensarling of Texas State announced October 31 terms 8 2016 margin of victory 61 points 2016 presidential Trump by 28 points Pat Tiberi of Ohio date announced October 19 terms 9 2016 margin of victory 37 points 2016 presidential Trump by 11 points Tim Murphy of Pennsylvania resigned in scandal date announced October 5 terms 7 full terms 2016 margin of victory uncontested 2016 presidential Trump by 20 points Dave Pratt of Michigan date announced September 11 terms 2 2016 margin of victory 13 points 2016 presidential Trump by 5 points Charlie Dent of Pennsylvania date announced September 7 terms 7 2016 margin of victory 20 points 2016 presidential Trump by 8 points Dave Reichert of Washington date announced Sept. 6 terms 7 2016 margin of victory 20 points 2016 presidential Clinton by 3 points John J. Duncan Jr. of Tennessee date announced July 31 terms 15 full terms 2016 margin of victory 51 points 2016 presidential Trump by 35 points Ileana Ros-Lehtinen of Florida date announced April 30 terms 14 full terms 2016 margin of victory 10 points 2016 presidential Clinton by 20 points date announced January 25 terms 5 2016 margin of victory 28 points 2016 presidential Trump by 19 points date announced January 6 terms 13 full terms 2016 margin of victory 27 points 2016 presidential Trump by 14 points.